So I am. So welcome to the meditation day. I decided to talk about a subject which I know, I think maybe not in Sri Lanka, but in England, liable to illicit groans, oh God, Sila. I want to talk about Sila and how, in particular in Buddhism, the particular features, why it's a bit different from in other religions. I was brought up a Catholic, and so in Catholicism, in Christianity, you have the Ten Commandments. Whereas in Buddhism, we have the five precepts. It's a very different kind of idea. So there's also as I understood it anyway, when I'm growing up, the Ten Commandments are just these things that are given to you, with no real relation to the rest of the teachings. In fact, I mean, the Ten Commandments come from the Old Testament, and Christianity, most of it comes from the stuff from later, from Jesus. So it's all kind of put together in different elements. Whereas, like everything in the Buddha's teaching, everything fits together very well. And so one of the things I want to talk about is how the Sila fits into the overall scheme of the Buddha's teaching. So for one thing, the precepts, as you know, the precepts aren't commandments. So the Ten Commandments in Christianity, in case you don't know, they're called commandments, and they're all phrased as thou means you. You will not do this, you will not do that. It's God telling you what to do and what not to do. Don't kill, don't steal, and all the other ones, most of which I can't remember anymore. Whereas the Buddha didn't claim that he had the right to tell people what to do. So even for Buddhists, the commandments are supposed to apply to everyone, whether you're Christian or not. That's God telling us what to do. Whereas the Buddha, he doesn't even tell Buddhists what to do. There are no commandments. So if you look at the way they're phrased, the precepts, it's Panati Pata Varamani Sikapada. I undertake the precept to refrain from this, that, or the other. I've decided to keep the precept to not kill. I undertake the precept not to steal. So it's a voluntary thing, entirely voluntary. So the Buddha never told his disciples, you should do this, you should do that. People came to him for advice, and he'd give them advice. And this is the Buddha's advice on how to be happy and how to improve your life. For monks and nuns, it's a different matter. Somebody said to me once, when I was a lay person, said, a Westerner, a New Zealander, Buddhism, I'm talking about the rules. I don't think Buddhism was about rules and things. And partly it's a misunderstanding that a lot of Westerners think they've got a very vague, wishy-washy idea of what Buddhism is about. It's a new age kind of follow your bliss, do what you want kind of thing. But also, there should be a misunderstanding that this is about monks and nuns. Monks and nuns have hundreds of rules because it's a different matter. For monks and nuns, it's as if in the Buddha's day, a person would go to the Buddha and say, please train me what to do. And so that's a different matter of saying, okay, tell me what to do. So then the Buddha would say, okay, well, do this, do that, don't do that. And then when monks misbehave, he could be quite very, very strict with them. But he never admonished lay people like that. So even like to think about how he spoke to King Ajatasattu. Ajatasattu had murdered his father, Bimbisara, who was one of the Buddha's main disciples. When Ajatasattu went to see the Buddha, he spoke to him politely, gave him teachings, and helped him. And then when, at the end, Ajatasattu confessed, oh, you're a foolish man, I killed that good man, Bimbisara. The Buddha simply said, yes, you were foolish, that was a bad thing to do. But you've confessed to it, and that leads to growth. So So he didn't tell him off, or an evil man, you're going to go to hell. He did, when he left, if you know the story, he then turned to the other monks and said, he's going to go to hell. He's bad. He would have been, the talk, he was really inspired just then. If he hadn't killed his father, he would have become a Sotapanna. You know, he was really inspired. But that blocked him. But he didn't say that to Ajatasattu. He just said, well, good for you. You know, you've made a decision to improve, and that's how you grow. But for monks, on the other hand, he could be quite very forthright, because they've come to him and said, you know, train me, tell me what to do. And if they don't do it, then it's quite reasonable for the Buddha to say, you foolish man, you know, I didn't come to you, you came to me. But for for the most of us, for most people, they're not commandments, they're just advice. That's one big difference. And the thing is, they fit in to the whole scheme of the Buddha's teachings as well, in a rather brilliant way. So the way that works is, so if you look at I can't remember all the commandments, but there's the usual things that most religions talk about: don't kill, don't steal. A couple of them, when I was a child, I remember being a bit confused. It was thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's goods. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's wife. This is two of them. And I remember asking to clarify this. Because covet is an old-fashioned word meaning to desire. And I think, is it a sin just to think, ooh, no, I fancy that, he's got a nice car, I wouldn't mind a nice car like that. And I was told, yes, that's to cover, just to cover your neighbour's goods. And even as a child, I thought, well, hang on, your thoughts come into your mind, you can't just stop your thoughts. So just by thinking it, you've already sinned. I thought this is unreasonable, because how can we just stop thoughts coming into our mind? Whereas, in contrast, in the Buddha's teachings, you can't break any of the precepts just by thinking. That doesn't mean you can't make bad karma by thoughts. So the Buddha talked about 10 unwholesome courses of action. So thinking ill will towards other people, that's unwholesome, that's bad karma. But it's not breaking the precepts. The precepts doesn't cover everything you can do bad. You can do a lot of bad things without breaking the precepts. Precepts are a basic idea of, well, keep this, and this will protect you a lot if you keep these precepts. And even for the monks and nuns, so we have hundreds and hundreds, tens of thousands, not just the 227 Patimokkha rules, which we recite every few weeks. There's tens of thousands of minor rules in the Kandakas and all these sub-rules and things about how to behave towards other monks and how to look after your kuti and how to respect the elders and all these things. So I'm breaking one of the rules right now. Actually, I've got a tear in my robe that I haven't sewed up. Every day I don't sew it up. A dog attacked me, dog attacked me, pulled at my robe. So it's a dukkha. For every day I haven't sewn up that hole. But you can't break the rules just by thinking. So even for the monks and nuns, there's no rule you can break just by thought. Thought comes into it because the Buddha thought our minds are central to the Buddha's teachings. And a lot of the rules, what was in your mind when you did the action, is crucial to whether it's breaking a rule or not. But you can't break a rule simply by thinking. So even for people with this very high level of this high degree of finicky rules, the monks and nuns, you can't just break a rule by thinking the wrong thing. Because the mind is so fast. The Buddha said that many times. The mind is fast. You can't keep track of it. Whereas in Christianity, I was told you've sinned just by thinking this, that, or the other. And fortunately for me, when I was quite young, even as a child, I realised I can't control I'm not to blame if I think bad things. But if you indulge in bad thoughts, if you think somebody does something idiot, it's a kind of unwholesome kind of thought. But if you then start dwelling on it, what a practice for dwelling on bad thoughts, that's unwholesome. But if a thought pops up into your mind, and especially see if when you meditate, all sorts of weird thoughts come into your mind in meditation, and in fact throughout the day, but you don't tend to notice them most of the time because you're too busy. And they could come from the unconscious, from the past, and all sorts of things. And so it's quite important, because the Buddha understood the mind, to realise that the things that come into our mind, we shouldn't take them too seriously. I've known a couple of friends over the years who've had breakdowns, mental breakdowns, and in both the cases, they were too obsessed with their thoughts. I noticed this, that they were just thinking, and taking their thoughts too seriously. So I remember one friend saying about, I get these thoughts of this and that and the other, and I was thinking, don't worry about it. Everyone has weird thoughts, but some people take them seriously. And when people hear voices in their head, I wonder, well, I hear voices in my head, but they're just like thoughts just dribbling through, you hear if you're drifting off to sleep, or phrases come. If you take it seriously, you think, my God, what's going on? Where did that come from? But don't worry about it. So our thoughts aren't kind of evil, and bad thoughts don't make us evil. So this is another kind of difference. The Buddha understood this. But the way this helps with the training is that, so if you look at the precepts again, the 5 Buddhist precepts, I can't remember all the Christian ones, the 5 Buddhist precepts, and the first 4 are very clearly about what we think of as morality, and what the Christians talk about sin, and they're quite clearly about bad behaviour, and just about all religions would condemn violence. Again, exactly where they draw the line can vary. So for Christianity, it's okay to kill animals. There's nothing wrong with killing animals. In Christianity, they're there for our use. They've got a different attitude, not so compassionate. Whereas, say, for Jains, it's like the other extreme. So even if you don't intend to kill an animal, you kill it by mistake, an insect, you've committed bad karma according to the Jains. The Buddha disagreed. He said, well, no, if there's no intention, then that's not bad karma. So again, the Buddha focusing on the mind, realizing it's the intention in the mind that makes karma. In fact, he said, intention I call karma. Karma is intention. Any intentional action, whether it's body, speech, or mind, that's karma. You're making karma. And if there's no intention behind it, that's not karma. So if you walk out the door and step on a beetle, and you don't even know you're doing it, that's not bad karma. But if you look at the precepts, so then against violence, stealing, taking what belongs to others, sexual misconduct, lying. Generally, because people can agree that these are this is bad behaviour. Then alcohol, and a lot of, I don't know about in Sri Lanka, but a lot of Westerners have a big problem with this one. People drink. That's how people socialise. Like in England, when I grew up, you go to the pub. That's how people meet. Young people nowadays do it less apparently, but what we did, that's that you go to meet your friends in the pub, and people drink alcohol at the meals. And for Christians, I mean, the priests drink alcohol part of the actual ceremony. The thing they drink the wine because it's the story of the Last Supper, the Buddha sharing bread and wine. It's just a thing we do. So a lot of Westerners have a problem with that one because it's like, well, it's not bad, it's not immoral in the same way that killing and stealing is. So what's it there for? And there's two reasons really and one is to do with the simple fact that, well, no, in itself it's not bad behaviour, but you tend to do the other bad things when you're under the influence of alcohol. So, and it's almost like classic. You look at the other 4 precepts. Talking nonsense. This is what people do when they're under the influence of alcohol. Sexual misconduct. People behave in all sorts of ways that they would never behave when they were sober. Stealing, violence, and talking absolute nonsense, and talking rubbish. This is how people behave when they're drunk. I remember seeing a statistic actually, it's like 70% of burglaries occur under the influence of alcohol. Which is amazing actually. If you're burgling a house, it's not a good idea to be drunk. You know? But so many crimes. It doesn't mean that most people who drink alcohol commit burglary, but nonetheless, a lot of crime happens because of alcohol. Violence, a lot of violence happens because of alcohol, and so it weakens our wisdom, and we tend to break the other precepts. It not just our wisdom, but it weakens our sense of restraint. And so we restrain ourselves from bad behaviour. But under the influence of alcohol, that weakens our restraint, and we decide that actually it's not so bad. And I mean, especially in speech, people say things that they really regret. So that's one reason for refraining from alcohol. But another thing is to do with what it does to your mind. It makes you stupid. And the Buddha's path is all about developing the mind and developing wisdom. So, I mean, now I wouldn't dream. When I first went to the monastery, yeah, there was still this kind of craving. I didn't actually intend, I wasn't tempted to drink alcohol, but the habit was still there. So the craving. So I remember visiting a friend, and they were having this. Two friends of mine. They opened a can of beer, and they just looked at me and said, "I don't suppose you're interested." And I said, "No, no, no." And I was still a novice. I was in white in those days, and but the craving was there. I could see the kind of, and the feeling of, a can of beer in the afternoon. But there was not remotest desire to actually play the precepts. But then after a while, I mean, after say, a year or so in the monastery, the thought of drinking, getting alcohol, was just like, my God, no. Why would I want to do that? I like being awake and alert. Why do I make myself stupid? I actually had an incident where we were building a bonfire. And this was after I was still a novice, and we couldn't find any paraffin or whatever to get this bonfire ready for New Year's Eve, a retreat. So we used this methylated spirits, poured it on. And afterwards, only afterwards realised, become a bit intoxicated from the fumes, because I was feeling very weird. And eventually, that's what it is. And then this is on a retreat, and there was a nun teaching this retreat, and I was sitting in white as a helper. And then I realised what it was, and then we sat in evening meditation. I felt really self-conscious. Oh my God, I'm intoxicated here. And it was a horrible feeling. And I remember thinking, I used to do this for fun. I used to do this for fun. This is awful. So certainly after that, I was not remotely tempted to just make yourself dull and stupid. So anyway, so this is the thing. So it's about training our mind, the Buddha's teaching. So it goes against that. So this is the thing about the brilliance of the Buddha's teaching of Sila. It's not just an arbitrary thing. Oh yeah, and by the way, be a good boy, be a good girl. It's about training the mind. So there's this three-part. There's Sila, and then there's Indriya Samvara, sense restraint. I don't know how familiar you are with that kind of thing. I know that Sri Lankans, I talk to Sri Lankans, they tend to know a lot more about Buddhist terms than I do sometimes. Talk to Westerners, they never heard of sense restraint, they don't know what you're talking about. So there's Sila, the behaviour, the coarse behaviour, then there's sense restraint, and then there's Bhavana. And it's like there's no hard division. So for Westerners, they come to Buddhism, they think, well, morality and all that has nothing to do with meditation. But actually, in the Buddhist teachings, there's no hard line between your behaviour and your meditation. And the kind of bridge between them is the sense restraint. So if you think of the precepts, we have the 5 precepts, and then the 8 precepts, which people keep when they go to the monastery on the Poya days, and then the 10 precepts for novices and Dasasila Mata, novice monks and nuns. And then you've got the 227 precepts. And it's to do, once you go beyond the basic, behaving badly, it's about restraining your senses. So the 8 precepts, you refrain from entertainment, refrain from eating in the afternoon. I mean, that's not about morality, there's nothing immoral about eating in the afternoon. It's about restraining your senses in order to help your meditation. And there's that aspect of the alcohol as well. It's beginning to shade into sense restraint. So you've got those first four about definitely this is bad karma, and alcohol, which in itself needn't be bad karma, but it's against the precept because it's the Buddha's advice, don't do this. And then you've got not eating in the afternoon, and being actually celibate for a day or something, or for the 8 precepts. And then the only difference then with the 10 precepts is just giving up money. And this is the step to becoming a complete renunciant. And that's the biggest step really than becoming a monk or a nun. Once you've given up money. And that's why I think in Sri Lanka, in the monasteries, it's not common in Thailand or England, but a lot of the monks, well, they're not fully ordained monks. For example, they're samaneras. They just stay here. There's these old men. I find it really difficult in the monastery. I never know these old men, whether they're monks or novices. I mean, in Thailand, you wouldn't get a novice who's 80 years old, but here you get this guy. It's like, well, it's easier if I just stay as a samanera, and then I can help myself to food and things like this. They don't have all these extra rules. And in a way, it's kind of true. You're still a renunciant, but maybe I'll talk more about that. But so that's the big step. So the thing is, there's a graduation there, and that indriya samvara is like it's something that's halfway between morality and halfway between meditation. It's a bit of both. Indriya samvara, and this is what the Buddha recommended for. I have to shift. I don't move. I end up being unable to walk when I get up. So just a second. Let's move this. Okay. So this sense restraint is. So the idea of sense restraint is, firstly, that you don't pay too much attention, you don't get drawn out to things. So monks, when they've got arms around, you're supposed to keep our eyes down. I don't do this actually, it's another thing I don't do. I talk to the children. But keep your eyes down. If you restrain your senses and don't get drawn out, and this helps your meditation. So, like coming to the city, it's very tiring, because unless you're very careful to restrain your senses, just like a stare ahead, then you lose a lot of energy just through all the impingement of all these sense impressions. So this is something to help your meditation, and with eating little. So with the Buddha's advice to monks, when monks would go to them and say, okay, well, you want to be trained? Right, well, don't eat so much. And after a while, he laid down the rule of just don't eat in the afternoon. For a while, that wasn't a rule. But the basic part of teaching is not to overeat. Don't overeat. Don't oversleep. And so these things, so not lying down on a high luxurious bed, that's the thing in the precept, that's how to pray as phrase. It means just not indulging in sleep and lying around as a pleasure, and when you wake up, get up, don't indulge in the pleasure of lying down. That's advice to his monks if you're devoting yourself to meditation. And what this does, this supports your meditation. And so it's a bit of both. It's about your behaviour with your body and speech, but how it affects your mind, so that because they support each other. So there's this graduation which you don't get in other, well, at least not in Christianity anyway. This idea that there's a connection there. So there's a reason, you see, for all the rules. They're not just this arbitrary list of things. So as you practice sense restraint, and your mind calms down, and then this helps with the meditation. And another reason, particular about the sila, so the course of behaviour and how that affects your meditation, is the the hindrance of restlessness. In English it's translated restlessness, restlessness and remorse, because actually the Pali is uddhacca kukucca. So uddhacca is restlessness, and remorse is regret. And this is one of the things that you're saved from if you behave well. So if you behave badly, then there's remorse in the mind, this restlessness and remorse, they kind of go together. And you can't settle down, the mind can't settle down. Remember, who was it? One of the monks was talking, I don't know who it was. In Perth, right, I lived in Perth for a while, there's a prison about 7 kilometres down the road, a prison farm. So kind of not an open prison, but a low security prison. And the monks would sometimes go there and teach meditation. I went once, but only one person turned up. So. And the person who turned up, he couldn't sit still. And I remember years ago hearing one of the other monks talk about going to the prison to teach meditation and saying it didn't work very well because they've all got such bad sila that they can't meditate. So I mean, actually, when I went there, that was just one person, but there was 2 people there. The guy who could have ran the meditation group, so he turned up because he had to turn up because I was there, and this other guy. And I was told, don't try to get them to sit for a long time in meditation. They can't sit for long. You just sat for 15 minutes. This guy couldn't sit still for 15 minutes. So this is, I mean, it might have just been him, but this is the result of behaving badly. And if you've got remorse, now there's an interesting thing there about that, about morality, about people's beliefs. Because some people don't have much remorse. Some people can behave badly and they doesn't seem to bother them. And I remember talking to my nephew years ago about this, and I can't remember what point I was making. I was saying about basically if you behave badly, you get this remorse. And he said, well, no, there are people, and there are people who they're utterly shameless people. And so if you think of like hardened criminals and violent criminals who they can do awful things to other people, and it doesn't seem to bother them at all. And he was saying, those people, they don't suffer because of their. Because my point was that you don't need to punish people for their bad behaviour. You're punishing yourself if you behave badly, because you're putting all this into your own mind. He said, well, and he was saying, well, they don't get the result. They don't get that punishment. They don't get the result of their bad behaviour. And he's wrong, basically. He was thinking that if you're utterly shameless, then it doesn't affect you. Of course, it does affect you. And I like, there was a phrase, I don't know if you know the Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. There's a phrase in there where the main character has a sister who's really, really good, and she's a bit naive actually. But she says, Elizabeth says to her, her sister is saying how happy she is and how she wishes happiness for Elizabeth, her sister, and says, I can never be as happy as you until I'm as good as you. And this is very true, actually, because this is quite a good character, actually, because although she's like ridiculously good, she's quite a believable character, and she's a very, very good person, this sister. And it's true, people who, it gets in the way of our peace. So it's not something you can demonstrate or prove this very easily. But a person who is utterly shameless and doesn't care about what they do to other people, there's a peace of mind which is unattainable to them. They cannot get. I mean, this is just something you know if you look at your own mind, I think. But I can't prove it. But to me, it's absolutely clear and obvious that the peace you get from lack of remorse is not available to somebody, even if they don't care. It's the way the mind works anyway. So this is part of the reason. So the reason for precept is partly just because other people, it's just that you should respect other people, but also because you are harming yourself if you don't behave well. You behave well towards other people. So it's for both reasons. So even if you're only concerned about yourself, then you should keep precepts, because you're not going to be happy. There's going to be this restlessness in the mind. And if you want to meditate, then really you need to get your sila in order, and behavior in order, because this uddhacca kukucca is going to, so like with King Ajatasattu, the Buddha said he would have been, he could have been a Sotapanna if he hadn't gone and killed his father. So this idea that somehow you can get away with it. The Buddha did say, there's a verse in the Dhammapada, the Buddha acknowledges that life can be easy for people, shameless people. He says there's a verse, life is easy for the shameless, life is difficult for those people with hidayogripa. It's difficult, but it doesn't mean life is good for the shameless. It's just life is easy. You can take shortcuts in life, and you get there quicker, shortcuts get you there quicker, and you can make your life easy. That's not the same as making yourself happy or looking out for your long-term good. So the Buddha wasn't naive about that. So this, one of the bugbears in mine is this idea that, and another monk, I read something another monk said recently. He said over the years, a lot of people have come to me and tell me that they want their children to be good, but not too good, because they think they'll be taken advantage of. And I point out to them that bad people can take advantage of bad people too. People can take advantage of many things. And in fact, I think I said this last time I was here, but I don't like to repeat myself too much. But in many ways, in some ways, bad people are easier to be taken advantage of. So a lot of a lot of tricks that people use to trick people out of their money are based on persuading somebody that they're involved in some kind of slightly dodgy deal. This is a bit of a dodgy deal here. If you get in, you can be part of this and you'll make some money. And that's a way of drawing people in to a kind of scam sometimes. Because if people think, if they say this is completely above board and honest, and then people think, well, how can I make so much money from this? And say, well, it's not completely above board, you see, it's a bit dodgy, but if you come with us, okay, yeah. It's also a way of drawing people in. So actually, people's bad behaviour can be a way of so there's a saying in English, it's not literally true. You can't, what it is actually, you can't I can't remember the phrase, but you can't con an honest man. You can't cheat an honest man. That's not literally true. You can cheat honest people. But it's very true. It's easier to cheat a dishonest person. Because an honest person, they see some kind of dodgy kind of deal which is too good to be true. And they think, no, this sounds a little bit strange. But it's easy to draw in dishonest people. So this idea that if you're too good, that people will trample over you. And yesterday there was a question in the question and answer session, and I can't remember that. I wish I kept a piece of paper, actually, I threw the paper away. This woman asked, I think it was a woman, I don't know if it was, asked a question about at work, behaving well and everything, it's all very good, but at work it means we get taken advantage of and people push us around. And I don't know, there was a particular phrase she used, but basically, it leaves us vulnerable. And I was pointing out that no, it doesn't mean you have to let people trample all over you if you're good. And if you think about the Buddha was no pushover. The Buddha people didn't trample all over the Buddha, and he was a very good person. So you can stand up for yourself and you can be quite forthright. It's not against the precept to say, if somebody says, oh, will you do this? And you feel reluctant, you don't want to say no. It's not against the precept to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I can't help there. I'm doing too much. I've got too much on my plate. Or no, I don't think that's appropriate. It's not against the precept to say to somebody, oh, I think the way you're behaving there is not very good, actually. And give people feedback. But in the Dhammapada, it says, again, somebody who admonishes you, points out your faults, you should look upon this person as a treasure. But most people don't look upon you as a treasure. I've discovered in life. People don't tend to thank you. But the monks, at the end of the rain retreat, the last month, at the end of the Ranger Retreat every year, one of the 26 Patimokkha meetings we have, and one of them, we don't chant the rules. We, at the end of the Ranger Retreat, we ask each other for admonishment instead of doing the usual recitation of the rules. And we will say, okay, you've been living together for 3 months, anything I've done, anything you've seen or suspected even, my actions in body, speech and mind that aren't appropriate, please tell me. And it becomes a kind of ritual actually, so nobody ever does. I've noticed. Sometimes it happens in Western monasteries, here nobody actually says, well actually yes, since you asked, but the idea is that you say, well actually yeah, you've been a bit slack about this or that or the other. So the invitation is there. So it's not against the precepts, in fact it's encouraged to actually point out, but in a compassionate way. And the Buddha said, if you want to give anyone negative feedback, you should first establish in your mind a sense of loving kindness towards them. And it should be coming from desire to do good. And quite often, you find when you're pointing out other people's faults, it's actually from a desire to hurt or desire to feel superior to them. So you have to be careful about it. But at any rate, but if this person was talking about the workplace, what it's like in the workplace, and how keeping sila, being a good Buddhist in the workplace means you don't advance and it can hurt your career. And the only sense in which that might be true is that if you're cutthroat and cut corners and are shameless, as was describing earlier, then it might be that you can progress better in your career. Yeah. But then that's not helping you in your life. But in general, it doesn't mean you have to be a pushover. So, like I mentioned, like the monks, there's one sutta I really like, called Bandhani Sutta, where this monk was not keeping the rules for the Ranger Retreat. When the Buddha introduced the rule about not eating afternoon, this monk was like, whoa, that's far too much, I'm not keeping that. But then, of course, he was too embarrassed to go near the Buddha, but he was breaking this rule. So he didn't see him for 3 months. His friends persuaded him to go and apologize. So he apologized to the Buddha. And the Buddha really laid into him, and he wasn't kind of wishy-washy about it. You foolish man, what did you think? I didn't, you came to me for training, and didn't you realize your fellow monks, they're looking at you, they're looking down on you, they're thinking this guy's not even keeping the rules. Yes, you're right, man. And then the novices, they're thinking that, and he keeps on, this monk. But then he says, but you've confessed, and that leads to growth. This is the same thing he said to Ajahn. And then he gives a very nice, encouraging talk to the Buddha. So it's out of compassion. The Buddha's giving all this advice out of compassion to people, not to tell them off. But at the same time, he was very, very strict with this monk. So we can be like this in our lives. Being a good person doesn't mean you've got to be wimpy and not say anything about people's behaviour. People behave badly towards you, say in the workplace, people behave inappropriately. It's okay, and it's appropriate to point it out, to stand up for yourself, but in a compassionate way, in a kind way, not coming from anger. And that's the difficult thing, because it's difficult, because if people behave badly and you are angry with them, it's difficult then to say anything that isn't coming from anger. So how do you deal with it? It's a difficult one. That's why it's a difficult thing to do. Establish a mind of kindness first, and then from there you give admonishment. So that's a particular kind of this idea that somehow by being immoral you can get away with things. Only in the short-term sense that you can get short-term gains. But even there, it all tends to go wrong. So people end up in prison. I remember actually Ramali said that there's a monk, Ramali, he was talking about, you may know this phrase, because it was fairly famous from a movie, Wall Street. I never saw the film, but in that film it has this Wall Street financier, and he gives a speech, but it's actually it's taken from a real speech from a man. In the speech, he's saying greed is good, and yeah, because greed is what propels our kind of society and economy and encourages people to excel, wanting more stuff. And so this is quite a famous phrase: greed is good. There was actually an actual Wall Street financier who said this in some kind of speech, and reminded him, I don't know if it's true, I just heard this from another monk. He said that businessman, he was on the rich list, the 500 richest people in America. Forbes magazine or something produced this every year. And one year he was on this list and he was at the bottom of the list, 500. And this is the way greed works. He didn't think, I'm one of the 500 richest people in the richest country in the world. He thought, I'm bottom of the list. And apparently he said to his wife, this is the last year you'll see me at the bottom of the list. And it was true, because next year he was in prison. Because despite being a billionaire, he wanted more, and so he dealt in, what do you call it, insider trading. And he got put in prison, so he wasn't on the list at all. So this is where cutting corners gets you, actually, or can get you. And people can get away with it for a long time, maybe even an entire lifetime. But so even that's not true. That life can be easy for the shameless, but it can also lead you to be, even in the short term, it can lead you into trouble. But in the long term, it just won't lead to happiness. So this is the reason for keeping the precepts. The Buddha was being compassionate when he gave the monks all these rules. Again, people think, oh, God must be awful with all these rules. And this is the thing about being a novice, being a fully ordained monk. It's they're training rules, so they're there to help. And people can't understand. I mean, when I was young, I broke rules all the time. I was broken rules. I was actually expelled from school. They keep me out of school. But in the monastery, I remember I had a reputation for being a stickler and being a really, oh my God, thing. I remember one fellow monk getting really annoyed with me after this meeting we had with the senior monks. I said, well, that's made that clear then. They said, oh, for God's sake, we're not in the army. And he was really annoyed, like stickler. The thing is, my attitude was different, I think, looking back, was because, I could see all the rules in the monastery. They're here to help harmonious community life. The reason we have these rules is we can live in harmony with each other. A lot of the monks' rules are about living in harmony, actually. When we have hundreds and hundreds of rules. But this monk who was from Sri Lanka actually said to me, he said, when you live by yourself, most of the video rules don't even apply, because it's about living with other people. So it's all to do with getting on harmoniously. So I think that's probably why I wanted to stick to the rules. Whereas at school, the rules are arbitrary. I mean, it's just silly rules, ridiculous things. Some of them, actually it's climbing, not climbing on the roof. I suppose it's quite a good reason because you're liable to hurt yourself, and they've got not breaking the fire alarm as a joke. I can see why they. But yeah, so the thing is, they're there to help us. The rules are there to help us. So all these loads of rules I've taken on as a monk. So when I think of the monks who decided to stay as samaritans, I think, it makes life easier. You can just keep food by yourself and others. But the thing is, you're missing out on all those extra training rules. So when the Buddha brought in that rule about not eating in the afternoon, it's quite clear that a lot of the monks didn't like this at all. And there's the Badali, who just didn't keep it at first. But then there's another monk who goes to the Buddha in one sutta, he says, and when you introduced that rule about not eating in the afternoon, I thought to myself, this samana is far too demanding. The best food is in the evening. Nobody cooks in the morning, and all the best food is in the evening. This is far too much. But I kept the rule out of respect. And God, life is so much simpler now. I mean, I'm so grateful to you, because I would never voluntarily have just stopped eating in the afternoon. But because you said we have to, then I did it. And now I see how easy life is. And many of the rules we have to keep. If you try to discipline yourself, it's quite difficult to keep to. But if you've taken on these rules as a monk and you have to confess when you break the rules, it's a lot easier to keep the rules. And there are things you keep that then you train yourself and I'm more disciplined. I wasn't a very disciplined person before when I was a layman. Become more disciplined because you've got no choice. So it forces you. Like, for instance, alcohol, actually. I mean, because people in England, people drink, that's what people do to socialise. And it doesn't mean someone's a bad person, because most people drink. So when I became a Buddhist, I thought, right, okay, I stopped drinking alcohol. So I tried giving up, but I was still meeting my friends in pubs, so I didn't drink non-alcoholic beer. But you have things like, I remember one friend, he said, okay, I met him. He said, okay, what do you want? I said, oh, can I have this non-alcoholic, blah, blah, blah. He said, no, let me give you a real drink. I said, well, no, I mean, that's what I'm drinking. He said, I don't know, and he was testing me. I said, look, you asked me what I want to drink. That's what I want to drink. And so you get this kind of attitude. And people resist. If you change your behaviour, your friends can resist. Friends and family resist. Or if you start trying to behave in a different way, it's a whole other topic, actually. But one of the difficulties is that people resist you changing, and they like you to behave in the way that they're familiar with. And I remember getting back from the monastery once, and there was a recording on my answer phone. No mobile phones back then. And hello, you there? You're not in that bloody monastery again, are you? And they were getting really annoyed, really upset. Oh my God, we're going to lose him. So, and the other thing about giving up alcohol I found difficult was that I was still going socialising with my friends, but I realised how boring they were. If you're sober and you're with people who drink alcohol, and it really strikes home, my God, this makes you stupid. And I usually enjoy talking to them when I've been drinking and they've been drinking. I'm enjoying the conversation. So presumably, I'm as stupid as they are when I'm drunk. But I didn't feel like I'm as stupid. There's a very funny, I thought it was very funny, there's a program called The Simpsons, this cartoon program. I think it's still going, actually. And I remember this episode from years ago where there's a beer in there, Duff beer, and Homer Simpson's always drinking Duff beer. And they go to a theme park, the Duff beer theme park for the day, a day out. And ridiculous idea. And you can get these kind of things, children's toys and stuff, X-ray specs. You put these, I remember getting these in a joke shop, and you put on X-ray specs, and it's supposedly you can see X-ray. But what it does, it just gives you a double vision. If you hold your hand up in front of it, it looks like you can see the bones. It's just a kind of double vision of it. So anyway, so Bard, this little boy, he gets these specs and says, see the world through the eyes of a drunk. He puts his glasses on, and he turns around, but he's a little boy, he doesn't understand what's going on. He turns around, and there's this beautiful woman looking at him and saying, I find you very attractive. I'm fascinated by everything you say. And then suddenly, this woman whips him off, and it's not a beautiful woman, it's his rather ugly aunt, she's a bit of a battle axe, an awful woman, and she's screaming abuse at him, saying, take this mom here. And he's like really confused, because through the eyes of a drunk, you see, somebody who's not being friendly to you, looks like, I'm fascinated by everything you have to say, and she's really beautiful. So this is how it deludes us, basically, when we're out. So also, when you're drunk, you think you're being really witty and coming up with really interesting things. In fact, you're just talking nonsense, and the other person's talking nonsense back. But anyway, so I found that was maybe more difficult to give up drinking alcohol as well. But in the end, not long afterwards, I decided to become a monk. So I thought, to hell with it. I'll wait until I go in the monastery, then I'll stop drinking alcohol, and it'll be easier. And of course it was then, because then there's no question I was ever remotely tempted to drink. So this is one of the advantages of having a set of precepts, is that it sets a kind of clear boundary where you don't step over them. So having hundreds of rules in the monastery is very helpful, because it stops you doing things that otherwise you wouldn't down. It's a mere little thing, it doesn't matter. So you think, okay, well, I can't do that. And you get the benefit then of refraining from all these little things. But with the 5 precepts, that's an important thing as well, actually, because if you have, the Buddha did say to a monk once, one of the monks said, again at this time, the Buddha's, this monk came to the Buddha and said, look, there's over 150 rules, at that time there was over 150 rules, they grew over time. He said, I can't keep 150, I can't remember all those 150 rules. And the Buddha said, well, can you remember 3 things? And he just said, I can't actually remember what the 3 things were, but basically, don't do wrong with body, body, speech, or mind. I think that's what he said. But if you keep this, then you'll be keeping the other precepts. And sometimes people think, well, why have all these rules? It's just, I just follow my own gut or my own sense of right and wrong. But the advantage of having clear guidelines is that it's very clear if you step over them. So if you say to yourself, I undertake the precept not to take what is not given, not to lie, not to commit sexual misconduct, not to kill, then it's very clear what's breaking them and what isn't. And if you're tempted to maybe just then go a bit further, it's clear, well, that's breaking a precept. So having clear guidelines clarifies things and stops you maybe drifting into bad behaviour. So, as I said, people know, they don't have to be told that if you've, say, got a wife or husband, that having an affair with somebody else is bad behaviour. You don't need to be told that, everyone knows that precept. But if it's a thing you've consciously said to yourself, well, not, again and again and again, then if there's somebody you meet, you really like them, you're tempted to flirt with them, and so on, then you see that this is against the precept. Whereas if you've just got a vague sense of right and wrong, it's less clear, and you can drift closer and closer to bad behaviour. So having clear precepts is very useful for that reason as well as being good advice. Determining them is it's a useful, just a trick, a training technique, if you like, by determining them, and which is why it's a good idea to frequently actually say it again and actually mean it, not just recite the words. But I undertake the precept. The other thing about reciting, asking for the precepts repeatedly is because, again, the Buddha is realistic. We undertake the precept, but we will break the rules. We don't keep the precept with the intention of breaking the rules, but inevitably we break the rules, and that's why you undertake them again. Think, okay, as the Buddha said to Ajatasattu and Padani, okay, you've behaved badly, but you've undertaken restraint for the future. That's what leads to growth. So every time you realise you've broken precept, you think, okay, in future I will undertake not to do it again. And that is how you grow. In fact, as the Buddha said to Rahula, reflection, this is the only way, this is how people develop spiritually, is that you reflect on your actions, and if you're going to do something and it's not a good idea, don't do it. Or if you're doing something and you reflect on it, and you realise I shouldn't be doing this, just stop. And if you look back on your actions that you've done and realise that they were bad, then you think, okay, in future I won't do it. And just by repeatedly making that determination, this is how we gradually improve. I had a lot of anger when I was young, and I remember I used to have tantrums, and I'd lose my temper and hit people and things. And I remember feeling despair. I remember when I was in juniors, I was in low school, I must have been 11 years old, and I remember thinking, when will I ever be free of this? This curse. It's not a curse. I don't know if it's a curse. It's my behaviour. This bad behaviour, this anger. And I remember thinking, well, all I can do. But the thing is, when you lose your rank, when you just completely lose it, there's no time to think, and it's happened. And then there's the remorse. And I remember thinking, well, all I can do is just try each time determine next time I won't do it, and then next time I will. I don't know. But all I can do is just determine and try. And I can't remember how it faded, but a number of years later, it suddenly occurred to me one day, my God, it's been years since I've done that, since I've lost my temper and really gone wild. And I couldn't remember when it had stopped. I looked back and I thought, when did I stop? I don't know. it's gone. It's gone. And it presumably, I mean, just gradually through reflecting each time, remorse, and reflecting back on what you've done, determining, okay, well, I won't do that in the future, and each time you misbehave, you break the precepts, you determine, okay, I did it again, but I'll try in the future not to do that. And this is how you improve. This is what the Buddha said to Rahula. Not to despair, because you can change, but the change can be gradual. And as I mentioned yesterday, we talked about meditation. Change can be so gradual we don't see it. And there's a good simile the Buddha gave with the axe handle, where a workman has this axe which he uses all the time in his work, and over the years, after many years, the axe has moulded to the shape of his hand. It's worn away, and it fits perfectly just to his hand. He can hold it really comfortably. But each day, you can't look at it and go each day, oh yeah, this much is worn away, because it's absolutely negligible. The first day he uses an axe, at the end of the day, it looks exactly the same. At the end of the week, it looks exactly the same. Even a year, you wouldn't really notice any difference. And yet, there must be something happening, because 15 years later, it's moulded to the shape of his hand. And so it is with our practice. Even if we can't see improvement, it's happening. So the thing to do is just to make a determination and then try again. And as with our sila, so with our meditation, and because they're not two different things in Buddhism. They're not two different things. They're part of the same training, this is all the way the mind works. So it's all it's part of the same process. And what applies to your behaviour of body, what applies to your behaviour of speech, so these things same apply to the mind. So training the mind in meditation and training the mind in morality aren't really any different. They're all part of the same process. So that's just to encourage the idea of sila, keeping sila, and reaffirming it, regularly reaffirming it. This is the purpose, to keep taking the precepts all the time. When you go to the monastery, you take the precept. The idea there is that, well, since last time you kept the precepts, you've probably broken a few, so let's just reaffirm them again. And that's not to feel bad, not to beat yourself up, but to acknowledge it and to think, well, okay, I'll try to do better in the future. Okay, is that good time? 9 o'clock? Is that time for the next bit? So I hope that's helpful. There's, I don't know what's happening next, but there'll be a walking meditation, then a talk from Perth, and I haven't got recorded. Is that right? Oh, this afternoon, is it? Okay. I know there'll be a guided meditation, but also from Perth. Okay, and then if after the meal I'll be around. There'll be a talk here, and I'll be sitting out there as well, questions and answers, and then we'll have a question and answer session in here. Okay.